Hi, I'm Dr. Jared Gardner, and I am a pathologist. I am the kind of doctor that diagnoses cancer and other diseases by looking at pieces of human tissue under the microscope. And one of my specialties is skin cancer. And what we do is we take, the dermatologist takes a biopsy, they put it into some chemicals, we process it in our laboratory, and we make it into a little slide like this. And if you look here, you can see that little piece right there. That's a tiny slice of the tissue, like a little thin salami slice, and we dip it in some stains so that we can see what kind of cells it's made of and decide if it's cancer or not, and if it's cancer, what kind. So this video is aimed at high school anatomy and physiology students, and I'm making this video in honor of Miss Deb Clapp, who is a honors anatomy and physiology teacher at Hamilton Wenham Regional High School in Wenham, Massachusetts. I met Miss Clapp on Twitter. She actually goes onto Twitter and asks questions of me and other pathologists about how to figure out what the different cells are that we're looking at under the microscope so that she can better teach her high school students. That is totally amazing, and we need more teachers like that. So if you're in Miss Clapp's class, you should give her an extra thank you that in her spare time, she goes out of her way to find experts who are actually doctors and ask them to get more information so she can better teach her own students. So Miss Clapp, I think you're a real inspiration, and this goes out to you and to your students, and I hope that other high school AMP students can learn from this also. If you want to be a pathologist, you have to go to college for 4 years, then med school for 4 years, and then residency and fellowship training after med school, which can take between 4 to 6 years. It's a long road, but it's the best job in the world, and I love it. But if you're interested in laboratory and microscopic stuff and don't necessarily want to go to med school, there are a ton of really cool jobs like medical technology, histotechnology, which are the techs who actually cut these slides. It's a super awesome job, and those people make my job possible. Without all of the awesome team of people working in our laboratory to make the whole process work, I couldn't do my job. So there are lots of great jobs in the medical field, and particularly in the laboratory, there are a lot of jobs that people don't know about that we really need more of if we're going to continue to do good patient care going into the future. So I'll put some links down in the video description to give you more information about all that stuff in case you're curious and are interested in pursuing that for a career. And I'll also put a little video about how we make a biopsy into a glass slide. And then what we do is once we have the slide, this is my microscope, and we put it on the stage here, we look at it, and I look through the microscope, and after a lot of training, I've learned what normal tissue looks like and what abnormal tissue looks like and how to tell those apart. It took a long time, and I still have a hard time with difficult cases all the time. I run into stuff that is difficult to figure out. So we never stop learning. No matter how many years we do this, we continue to see new things that are crazy and weird and that we're trying to figure out so that we can help our patients as best we can. So now I'm going to show you what I see actually through the microscope using a camera kind of like this one, and show you what I'm actually seeing. And we're going to talk about a couple of the basic types of skin cancer and what they look like. All right, so this is a biopsy of skin that the dermatologist took off with a thin blade. It's called a shave biopsy. And this is, I would say, normal skin, but it's actually not normal. The epidermis, the top part here, is relatively normal, but the dermis is not. The dermis, here's the epidermis, and then here's the dermis down here. The dermis is supposed to be all pink. Pink is collagen here. So all that collagen, that's what makes up the dermis, and the blood vessels and everything are in the dermis, and that supports the epidermis. I have a whole video about all the normal skin histology. It's way beyond what you need to know as high school students, but if you're curious, I'll put a link for that down below, and you can watch that in your spare time if you're a nerd like me and love learning new things. And I think nerd is the new cool, but maybe that's just what I tell myself to be okay with the fact that I'm old and I'm a dad now. So anyway, the pink is normally supposed to fill this whole dermis here. But look, all this blue stuff here, this blue-gray stuff, let me see if I can turn the arrow color. There we go. This blue-gray stuff, that's not normal. This is from sun damage. This is called solar elastosis. It's a bunch of elastic fibers that build up. This is the stuff that causes wrinkles. So when people tell you to wear sunscreen and not be out in the sun and not use tanning beds, oh, please, please, please don't use tanning beds. They are telling you the truth, because this stuff, you can't get rid of it. Once it's there to stay, and it makes your skin look old and wrinkly. And also, this is evidence that this person has had a lot of ultraviolet light either from the sun or from tanning. Both of them do the same thing. And the ultraviolet light comes through here, it damages the dermis, but along the way it damages the cells that live in the epidermis, these keratinocytes. And the problem with ultraviolet light is that it can damage DNA, and DNA, as you know, is what keeps the cells working the right way. And if you mess up the DNA, if you mess up certain genes, it can make the cells start to grow out of control, and they can turn into cancer. And skin cancer can be a real problem sometimes. It's a lot of types of skin cancer are treatable, but they require surgery. Some types of skin cancer, though, can be fatal. So it's really important to not have excessive sun exposure. We all get a little sun exposure, but you really should try to avoid it. Try to wear sunscreen, wear hats to shield your face, because this stuff is actually serious. And you don't think about it when you're a teenager, but when you're 60 or 70 years old, which I know is hard to imagine right now, but I see old people all the time that really regret, I think, all the sun damage that they got. So all right, enough of my preaching about that. But look, these cells here, the keratinocytes, as if you're in anatomy and physiology class, you may have already learned this. Let's look real close here. This is using a high power lens on my microscope. This is magnifying the cells 400 times. So this is a 400 times closer look than we can see with our naked eye. So this pink stuff on top, this is the dead skin layer. This is called the stratum corneum. When your skin gets dry and flaky and the stuff that falls off, that's what's falling off. These are dead keratinocytes. Don't worry, it's normal. This is exactly how it's supposed to work. This normally kind of helps make a little layer to keep water and stuff outside of your skin. Makes a barrier to protect the inside of your skin. The keratinocytes, just like other cells have two parts, right? They have the nucleus, which is this round purple dot in the middle. That's where the DNA lives, and that's the part that's really important. It's kind of like the brain of the cell. The DNA, it contains, it's like a recipe book that contains recipes or instructions for building all of the different proteins, enzymes, everything that the cell needs to function normally comes from the DNA. So again, it's really important that the DNA does not get messed up. And then the pink stuff in the cytoplasm here, that's called cytoplasm, the pink stuff around the cell. And that's mostly made of proteins. And in the case of keratinocytes, the protein that's there, the most common protein that's there is keratin. Keratin's like this really thick rope of protein, and it interconnects in between all of the keratinocytes, and then the keratinocytes have these little junctions that hook them onto their neighbors. So all of the skin cells, all those keratinocytes hold together with a really strong iron grip, and that's what keeps your skin from falling apart when you rub on it. So that's how the epidermis works, and that's the nucleus, and then the pink stuff is the cytoplasm. All right, so this is relatively normal. This is what a relatively normal epidermis looks like. Now I'm going to go back to lower power here, and then we're going to go over here and I'll show you what abnormal looks like. Oh, let me get the light correct. Cool. Here we go. Whoa, that's not normal. See, look, normal here, abnormal here. The epidermis has gotten really thick for one thing, and then let's look closer. It's a lot more cellular. There are a lot more cells in here than there should be. See, this is the normal number of cells. This is way too many cells. There are too many cells because the cells are growing out of control. The cells normally grow until and then they're programmed to stop growing until they're needed to divide and grow again. These cells have lost that ability to control their growth, and so they're growing kind of out of control, and they're filling up the epidermis and packing it full of cells. Also, the nuclei are larger and darker, and that's kind of evidence that there's a DNA problem inside, and that DNA problem here is caused by sun damage. So the whole epidermis here is completely replaced by these dark atypical keratinocytes, and so this is called squamous cell carcinoma, because the epidermis, the keratinocytes, as they go to the top, they flatten out and they get into a little flat shape that we call squamous cells. So when you get a cancer of keratinocytes, it's called carcinoma. This squamous cell carcinoma is still confined to the epidermis. It's all in the epidermis, and it's not invading down into the dermis. See this thing right here? This is just a hair follicle. This is not tumor. That's where your hair comes from. It's hair follicle. So this cancer is in the epidermis. So we call this squamous cell carcinoma in situ. In situ is Latin. It means in its site, or its place. It's in the place where the cells normally are supposed to be. It hasn't invaded or spread yet, but it's still growing out of control, so it's cancer. So that's squamous cell carcinoma in situ. So let me go over to the next piece of the biopsy up here. We get this biopsy and we cut it into a couple pieces and then look under the microscope. Whoa, that looks very different. This dermis is totally not normal. And here, let's look again. Here's the squamous cell carcinoma in situ, filling the epidermis with atypical cells. Let's look at how atypical they are. And then we'll go back to that thing in the dermis. See, these cells are big and they're really dark. They're very atypical. Oh. I'll turn the light up a little bit. You can see there are some pretty large, funny looking nuclei in here. That's not normal. Now over here, what we see is that these cells are growing down into the dermis. They're islands of tumor that are invading down into the dermis. So this is called invasive squamous cell carcinoma. So again, it's made of keratinocytes, but they're malignant. They're growing out of control and they're not staying in the epidermis where they're supposed to. They're invading all the way down into the dermis. So the problem with that is, depending on what part of the body it's on, if this is on your nose or your eyelid or somewhere in your face, this could be a real problem because it can grow down and you have to remove this with surgery. So if it grows into a normal structure, then the dermatologist or the surgeon has to actually remove tissue around it to make sure that the cancer's out. If you leave it alone, it can grow out of control to the point that it invades nerves or invades into blood vessels or lymphatics, could even spread to other parts of the body. And could cause you to die. So actually, most of the time, unless these are not caught early, if they're caught early enough, they're usually easily treated with surgery, but sometimes that surgery requires, parts of your face to get removed and put back together, and that's not really a fun thing to have done. So even though it may not necessarily kill you, it can really cause a problem. But again, I've seen cases where these tumors did actually behave aggressively and cause a patient to die. So it is a serious thing that we have to consider. And then look here at these tumor cells. Look at that guy. It's ginormous, okay? It's a huge, ugly nucleus. Let's see if we can get the light right here. That tumor cell is like 30 times bigger than the other tumor cells. It ate like 20 of these guys for lunch, okay? So this is called pleomorphism. When the nuclei all look the same, they're called monomorphic. They all look the same. But when we start seeing big, much larger nuclei than the other nuclei, that means that's a sign that the tumor is abnormal, that it's got too many extra genes and it's got a lot of extra DNA, and that's a bad thing, actually. You'd think extra DNA would be good, but it's not. You're supposed to have exactly the right amount of DNA and exactly the right amount of genes, and if you mess any of them up or put in extra or take away, it causes everything to fall apart and go wrong. And so that's pleomorphism. That's a big, huge, ugly cancer cell. I'll see if I can get you a closer view at it. We'll turn the light up a little. And additionally, look at what's in the center of that cell. That little kind of reddish purpley dot, that's called a nucleolus. And nucleoli are where ribosomal proteins are made, or ribosomal RNA is made, and so that's a little bit more complicated than you need here, but we often see big, huge nucleoli. It looks kind of like an eyeball staring up at us. So those big nucleoli, we often see that in cancer cells, not always. And then what's happening here? Look at all this pink stuff. This pink stuff with smudgy, like dark purple or black dots here, these are tumor cells that are dying. We call this necrosis. Necrosis means that the tumor cells, they are dying, and a lot of times the reason they die is because the tumor is growing too quickly and it doesn't have enough blood supply. So those tumor cells in the middle that are away from the blood vessels, they run out of oxygen and they die. So again, that might sound good, but it's not really good because it means the cancer is growing so fast that it's outgrowing its blood supply, and you don't want to have a fast-growing cancer. That's not usually a good thing. All right, let me see if I can find one other thing to show you. Here we go. See this guy here? It's a little hard to get these to show up on the video. Let's see if I can flip that and make it show up. No, not really. That one's a little hard to see, but maybe this one's a little easier. See this thing here? It looks kind of fuzzy and blue. That is a mitosis. That is a tumor cell that's dividing. So that's a mitosis there. Here's one right here. And here's one right here. These are actually much easier to see under the microscope, but they can be a little challenging to show on a video. And so, oh, here's more of them. Here's this little fuzzy guy there, mitosis, mitosis. Here's a mitosis here where you can tell that's separating from that. The two lines of chromosomes are dividing apart, and it's going to make two daughter cells. And I'm sure you've probably learned about that in anatomy, physiology, or in biology. Here's another mitosis, here's another one. So all of these cells, just in this little area, all of these cells are dividing, and when they divide, it turns one cancer cell into two cancer cells. Again, it's because the cells are growing out of control. So this is invasive squamous cell carcinoma. Okay, let me show you another squamous cell carcinoma. And this one, the reason I want to show you is two reasons. One, it looks very pink. Look at how pink it is. The tumor cells are a lot more pink than the last one, and this is how they usually look. I should have showed you this one first, maybe. See all the pink stuff here? This is keratin. This is the stuff that keratinocytes are made of. That's why they're called keratinocytes. So here the tumor is making keratin. There's so much keratin that the cytoplasm looks very pink, and there's a bunch of pink cytoplasm here around these tumor cells. And also some of the cells are dying and the dead keratin's getting trapped in the middle here. So we call those keratin pearls, and these are a feature we often see in squamous cell carcinomas. But you can see that the epidermis is pink because of the keratin right here. This is the normal epidermis that's pink. And then look at the tumor cells. They're pink too because they have keratin. And look at the difference in their nuclei. We got relatively small cells up here, and then big, ugly, atypical guys down here. Huge nucleoli. See the little dark dot in the middle? All right, and then here's a bunch in the middle of this tumor. There's a big cyst filled with keratin and also blood. Look, those are blood cells. Sometimes tumors bleed into themselves. I'll go closer, you can see. Those are red blood cells. So there's some blood, and then there's dead keratin out here in the middle of this squamous cell carcinoma. The other reason I wanted to show you this is, so first of all, that you can see that the tumor kind of resembles the normal tissue that it's kind of coming from. That's a simple way to explain it. It's actually a little more complicated, but that's a simple way. But look what's the tumor's invading all the way down here through the dermis into this stuff. This is fat down here. This is the subcutis, the fat layer underneath the skin. And the tumor is actually invading all the way down into the fat. Once squamous cell carcinomas get down in the fat, they can behave more aggressively. So that's usually a problem, a bad thing. But the reason I wanted to show you is over here what the tumor's doing. Let me find it. Here's the tumor. It's growing down into the deep dermis. All this pink stuff is collagen. It's invading into the collagen of the dermis. Oh, look, these are sweat glands right here. That's where your sweat comes from, eccrine sweat glands. But look what this thing is. This is cancer right here. This is the squamous cell carcinoma, and it's wrapped around something normal, something it's not supposed to be wrapped around. This is a nerve. This little pink line right here, this is a nerve right here. And this is a cancer wrapping around the nerve. And once it's in a nerve, it can travel along the nerve like a highway, and that lets it spread more quickly away from the site where it came from and into the tissue surrounding it. So that's a bad thing. Once the tumor's in nerve, it has a higher risk of growing back. Even if you cut it out and think that you got all of it, sometimes it's skipped along the nerve. And look, I think even in this nerve you can see, I don't know if you've learned about nerves yet in your class, but see that little dot? That's an axon. That's actually the little nerve fiber itself. And then these little cells here, these nuclei, those are called Schwann cells, and their job is to kind of wrap and protect the axons. And the axon's like the little wire that carries the signal, and the nerve's got a bunch of little axons in them. So it's very tiny stuff that's hard to see, but it's amazing we can see this under a microscope. And this kind of microscope and this process of cutting tissue and staining it is like over 100 years old. The microscopes have gotten a lot better, but basically we're still doing this the same way we did 100 years ago, and it still works really well. And then look here, there's more nerve over here, and this nerve has got a lot of inflammation around it. All that stuff's white blood cells, and the reason the white blood cells are there is because they know that there's cancer here and they're trying to attack it. There's more of the cancer right next to the nerve, and if we go down here even deeper, look what we find down here. This is the same nerve, we're just seeing it in different slices. We're looking at one slice of a three-dimensional piece of tissue, so the nerve kind of comes in and out of the tissue. And look here, here's that same nerve down deeper. Oh, if I can steady my hands here. Here's the nerve. This structure right here, this little thing here is the axon. There's an axon, there's axons in here, they're all over. And out around the outside of it is cancer. So this nerve is completely wrapped by cancer, and you can see that the cancer, you go to lower power, the cancer is skipping along the nerve. It's spreading from here, and it's skipped down to here, and it's skipped down here, and it may be even deeper down and we just aren't seeing it yet. So that's called perineural invasion, and that's a bad sign when we see cancers do that. Now this is also a type of cancer. This cancer is a lot more blue than that other tumor. Compare it to the epidermis here. The epidermis is very pink. These blue nests, they have something special right around the outside. See how the tumor cells all line up in a row around the outside? They line up in a row almost like the boards of a picket fence. Sometimes pathologists have really active imaginations, and we make up descriptions that normal folks would look at and say, what? But in any case, I think you can kind of tell there that the cells around the outside of the nest of tumor are all lined up. The cells are very blue on the inside. These guys are kind of long and lined up. And this is called a basal cell carcinoma. In the past, people called it basal cell because they thought that this tumor came from the basal layer of the epidermis. Now we actually think that's probably not necessarily true. These cells may actually be coming from hair follicle type cells. Again, we think things are simple, and then we start studying them more and they become a lot more complex. So this is a basal cell carcinoma. This is actually the most common cancer in human beings. It's very, very common. It usually does not kill people, but again, if it's on your eyelid or your nose or somewhere else, or if you let it grow for a long time, it can require a big surgery to take care of. There are rare cases where this has killed people, but it's pretty rare. So these are really common. All of you probably have family members who have had these. They can occur. This is the most common type of skin cancer I see in young adults. I see this sometimes even in people in their early 20s or 30s, and usually it's because of people that have had tanning or a lot of sun damage, even as a kid or as a teenager. So getting sunburns now as a teenager puts you at risk for developing this cancer and other types of cancers later on in life. And again, here's an example of why this tumor is a problem. Here's the skin surface up top, all right? And oh, look over here, you can see this is an ulcer. The tumor has grown fast enough that the top of the skin has fallen away, and all this stuff on top is a scab. This is what scab looks like under the microscope. Let me show you. It's made of a mixture of blood and fibrin, which is the stuff in blood that makes it clot. And then also this stuff is dead epidermis cells, dead keratinocytes. And they're all mixed together, and this stuff is white blood cells. These are white blood cells or neutrophils, so like pus, basically, a little bit of pus mixed in here, and that's bacteria. I don't know if I can get those to come into focus. They're really tiny. But these tiny, tiny little blue dots, these are cocci bacteria, probably, let's see if I can turn the light up and get you to see. Those are probably like staphylococcus organisms, which actually live normally on the skin surface. So when you get a little ulcer with a scab on it, they tend to like to grow in that. So this is a mixture of blood, dead white blood cells, dead keratinocytes, all gooped onto the top of this open hole in the epidermis. So that's what a scab looks like, whether the scab is because of a cancer or because you cut yourself when you're doing something and then it heals up. So that's what scab normally looks like. All right, but look here at what's happening. The tumor is invading way down into the dermis. See these little blue islands down here? All of that is tumor that's invading, going through the normal tissue deeper and deeper and deeper. And the deeper it goes, the more difficult it becomes to remove, and the more likely it is to come back if you don't remove it with enough normal skin around it. So this is called infiltration. The tumor cells are infiltrating and invading into the dermis, and that's not normal. So these tumor cells don't really like to spread to other parts of the body, but they love to invade into the tissues around them, which again, if the tissue happens to be on your face or somewhere sensitive, that's particularly unpleasant to have happen because it can be a problem. All right, the last one I'm going to talk to you about is called melanoma. And melanoma is less common than basal cell carcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma, but where I live, in the south part of the United States, we have a lot of older sun damage patients here, and a lot of melanomas are related to sun damage. Not all. There are people that get them that are not sun damage related, but certainly sun damage and ultraviolet light exposure puts you at a higher risk for getting melanoma. Melanomas, if you catch them early, are usually curable, but if you don't catch them early, they can be very, very bad. And unfortunately, melanomas, even a relatively small melanoma, say one the size of a pea, is actually very bad and very aggressive, and a lot of patients with a melanoma the size of a pea would end up dying from it. So it's a really serious cancer that even though you might think, oh, that little bump can't be a problem, it could be. Now, the good news is melanoma is really, really rare in kids. So if you're a teenager right now and you start worrying about every little brown spot on your skin, calm down, you're probably fine. But that said, if you do have a spot that's changing or new or bothering you, definitely get your parents to take you to the dermatologist because dermatologists are really good at looking at brown spots and other spots in your skin and figuring out if they're worrisome or if they're just a normal mole. We all have moles, which are basically benign, non-cancerous proliferations of melanocytes. Let me see if I can show you a melanocyte. They're really hard to see actually most of the time. They kind of blend in with the background skin. This little guy right here is a melanocyte. I'll turn the light up a little bit. So melanocytes, and then here's another one here, this little dark one right there. Melanocytes normally live along the bottom layer of the epidermis, the basal layer, and their job is to make melanin, the brown pigment that makes our skin different colors, okay? And some people have more melanin production and have darker skin, and some people have less. But the number of melanocytes is relatively similar for all different skin types, both light skin and dark skin, all right? And you would think that the melanocytes should be brown because they make melanin, but they actually aren't. In a really weird and strange process, they make melanin, and then they feed it to the keratinocytes next door to them. And the keratinocytes kind of store it over top of their nucleus. It's a little hard to see here, but right here you can see that brown cell, how that cell is kind of brown looking? That's not a melanocyte, that's actually a keratinocyte, and it's kind of borrowing the melanin that its buddy, the melanocyte, made for it. So isn't that nice? They're friendly to each other, okay? So sometimes though we get too many of these melanocytes grow together. And when they're benign melanocytes that grow into little aggregates, we call that a nevus or a mole is what normal common folks that aren't doctors call it. And then when those cells go bad and turn into cancer, they do this. And this over here is melanoma. So this is made of melanocytes. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my lighting. There we go. The melanocytes here are growing out of control. And you remember how small that little melanocyte was? Well, these melanocytes aren't small anymore. They're huge. They're huge and ugly. They've got a bunch of gray cytoplasm around them. See right here? These are all malignant melanocytes, melanoma cells. And they're growing. There are way too many. They are supposed to be kind of spaced out along the bottom of the epidermis, but here they're growing into a solid, thick layer underneath the epidermis. They're growing uncontrolled, and again, that's kind of the hallmark of cancer, is that the cells are growing out of control. And also, they're growing way up into the top of the epidermis. There's some, and here's some over here. That's not normal. They're supposed to stay down at the bottom. This is called pagetoid spread, and that means that, again, the melanocytes are growing too fast and too many, and they're not staying put where they're supposed to be. And this melanoma is definitely in the epidermis, but unfortunately, it also has invaded down into the dermis. And once the tumor invades, that's when it has access to get into the lymphatics and the blood vessels. And when it gets into lymphatics and blood vessels, it can spread to lymph nodes and eventually to other parts of the body where it can cause people to eventually die. And melanoma is a bad problem, particularly in places with a lot of sun exposure. And so that's why it's really important to make sure that you don't get too much exposure to sun, and also that you that if you have changing spots on your skin or growing worrisome spots on your skin, that you go and see your dermatologist about that. All right, so these are all the melanoma cells, and they've grown down into the dermis. And you can actually see here that some of these are actually starting to make brown melanin pigment. There's a little bit of pigment in the melanoma cells, but most of it actually falls out into the dermis and gets eaten up by macrophages, which are trying to pick it up and clean up the melanin. And all of these other little tiny cells here, these are white blood cells, lymphocytes, and they're here trying to attack the melanoma and destroy it. But unfortunately, they are not successful. But what's actually really cool is in the past less than 10 years since I've been out of medical school and training, there are actually new drugs that basically turn the immune system on overdrive and make it attack and destroy the melanoma. And those drugs are now starting to save people's lives who in the past, when I was in training, those people would have died. But now we have some of those people that can be saved because of these new amazing drugs. They're called checkpoint inhibitors, and they basically make the immune system run crazy, like out of control, and go berserk and attack the melanoma. And they're working on other types of cancers too, like lung cancers and other things that used to be very, very bad. They're still very bad, but now we're able to save some people. So that's why medicine is really cool and amazing, is that we get to take care of sick people every day, and there are new scientific advances all the time that are totally changing life for so many patients. And to me, that's the really the most amazing part of the job, is I get to continue to learn new things that challenge me and expand my mind, and also I get to help sick people, and I get to see people that are sick that sometimes end up getting better, and that we can help those patients, and that's the most wonderful thing. So I hope that this has given you a little bit of insight into what we do as pathologists, how we diagnose cancer by looking under the microscope. So when they say they send a sample to the lab, they don't just put it into a machine and it spits out a little answer that says, oh, cancer or not cancer. No, we do a lot of stuff to it. We make a slide, and then you have an expert doctor, a pathologist, look at it under a microscope, and based on a whole bunch of training decide, is this normal or abnormal? And all of figuring out abnormal starts with knowing what the normal stuff looks like. And that's why basic anatomy and physiology and basic histology is so important, and I use it every day in my practice because otherwise I wouldn't know what the abnormal stuff is. I wouldn't know what cancer is until I know what the normal stuff looks like. So I hope you've learned a little bit. Again, look down in the video description and you can see some other resources that'll give you more information if you're curious, or send me a message, leave a comment. And also, if you want to learn more medical stuff, I post it here on YouTube and also on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And I have links to all of my other social media channels down in the video description. You're welcome to follow me and contact me there. I love answering questions, and especially from excited young minds who are interested in going into science careers or medical careers in the future, because you guys are going to carry the field forward after I'm done and retired. So I'm always excited to see the next generation of doctors and scientists getting excited about this at an early age. Thanks so much for watching, and again, tell your teacher, whoever your teacher is, whether it's Miss Clapp or another AMP teacher, you have no idea how important your teachers and your mentors are right now. I didn't understand when I was in high school, and now I look back and I realize how lucky I was to have so many great teachers along the way that really poured into my life and helped me to become the doctor and the man that I am today. So tell them thank you. They do a lot of hard work behind the scenes, and I know I'm just an old person saying this, but they really do make a difference, and you should really show them how much you love and appreciate them for it. Thanks a bunch. Have a good day.